Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks so much for joining us for a 90-minute discussion that focuses on promoting community living and participation for individuals with mental illnesses. We're going to look most closely at a recent publication from the Temple University Rehabilitation Research and Training Center on Community Living and Participation that suggests a wide range of strategies that community programs can use to jumpstart community inclusion in their own agencies. I'm Richard Barron, co-director of Temple University's RRTC on Community Living and Participation, with a long background in research, training, and technical assistance to shape the policies, programs, and practices that provide opportunities for individuals with mental illnesses to fully participate in community life. And with me is Dr. Gretchen Snethen, also with the Rehabilitation Research and Training Center. And together we're going to be taking a look at the Jumpstarting Toolkit, highlighting specific strategies, talking about one or more effective examples of the work covered, and giving you a chance to respond to all of this. You can use the system you are on to type in comments and questions, and we will try to respond to them both as we go along and at the end of the session. Let me back up for just a moment and tell you a little bit more about the Temple University RRTC. We are funded by the National Institute on Disability Independent Living and Rehabilitation Research to promote community inclusion of individuals with serious mental illnesses. We're directed by Dr. Mark Salzer, and we are all part of the Temple University Department of Rehabilitation Sciences. The RRTC now has 15 years of both quantitative and qualitative research that is designed to demonstrate the need for and the impact of community inclusion support activities. But in addition, we also have 15 years of training and technical assistance using that research to support the policies, programs, and practices that can support community inclusion. And just to note, you can reach us and many of the resources we're going to be talking about today by going to our website at www.tucollaborative.org and particularly looking at our resources section. And that is where you will be able to find the Jumpstarting Community Inclusion Toolkit, and hope that you will download it and make effective use of it, and let us know how you feel about it. I wanted to take a moment as well to talk about what the toolkit is and is not. It is our newest effort to promote community inclusion. It's a compendium of ideas for community program leaders in both traditional and peer-run settings to jumpstart community inclusion activities. So we're talking about the ways in which psychiatric rehabilitation programs, the ways in which community mental health centers and their day programs, and the ways in which peer-run programs and services can begin to take a look at their own services and then begin to figure out the ways in which they want to move forward in doing a better job of promoting community inclusion. Now, we took this on in part out of a recognition that while we think we've been fairly effective in contributing to and summarizing the research literature of community inclusion, and I think we've been effective in defining many of the policies, programs, and practices that can move the field forward, I think we've been less effective in responding to trainees' questions of, well, what should I do next? And this is where we're seeking to broaden the understanding. We really wrote this program for programs and to give them an opportunity to review a wide array of opportunities for them to be active in promoting community inclusion without necessarily pointing them in this direction or the next direction. In putting this together, we've drawn on our own research and the work of others in the field. We've learned a lot from the programs we've been involved with in the past and the ways in which they've gone about doing this. And we have, I think, done a fairly effective job in summarizing some of the literature that you'll have an opportunity to look at. We should be clear that what the toolkit is not is a defined sequence of activities. We're not saying start here, do this, then do that, and then do the others. But it is really designed to be a set of ideas for you to choose among. It's not a comprehensive set of suggestions. We think many of you will be using this to develop your own ideas about how to move forward. And it's not an outline of required activities because of particular federal, state, or local mandates from a mental health administration. It is a broad-based set of possible first steps for local programs, a set of resources that we've outlined that you may be able to make use of, an initial expression of the possibilities that we intend to add to over time. We hope to hear from all of you about new ways that you've found to promote community inclusion and to periodically update this document with your ideas and new resources as they are developed. So we want to hear from you and want you to feel free to contact us with questions and ideas, requests for assistance, and your best ideas and resources so we can make this a very rich document over time. I also want to step back and just briefly, before we talk about the toolkit, clarify what we here at Temple mean by the phrase community living and participation. One of the definitions is Dr. Salzer's. He defines community living and participation as the opportunity to live in the community and to be valued for one's uniqueness and strengths like everyone else. There are two parts of this definition that I particularly like. I particularly like the phrase the opportunity. What we are about here is giving everyone who receives mental health services the opportunity to fully engage in community life. It doesn't mean everybody will. It doesn't mean everybody will be engaged in community life in every aspect of the ways in which our communities work. But it does say that everyone ought to have the opportunity, with the support of mental health providers, to live in the community, be valued for their uniqueness and strengths. And I like the phrase like everyone else. We are really talking about doing the mental health system doing what it needs to do to help people live full lives like everyone else in their communities. There's another definition I like, and this comes from an English group called the National Social Inclusion Program, which defines community inclusion as building pathways from segregated service provision into mainstream services. Groups or services, they say, that are solely for people with mental health problems may, and I would add unintentionally, reinforce segregation unless they are part of a supported pathway into mainstream services accessed by everyone. I particularly like the notion of a supported pathway. I think that's what mental health services, whether they are mainstream services or whether they are consumer-run, peer-run programs, ought to be doing, and that is providing a supported pathway, helping people to feel accepted and supported in our agencies, but then providing a pathway from those somewhat segregated services into everyday community life. But of course, my favorite definition is my own, and I often talk about community inclusion being about what recovery is for. There's really no question that recovery and the concepts of recovery have had a massive and important and beneficial impact on our field. And to the degree that recovery is partially about building hope and ensuring empowerment and providing for self-determination, hope and empowerment and self-determination are not goals in and of themselves, but are instrumental aspects of our services that really ought to lead to the opportunity for people to participate more fully in community life, in mainstream activities, to get competitive jobs and go to regular schools and participate in local congregations and build new personal relationships with people, and to be fully engaged in the community. That's really what recovery is for, and we think this makes an important addition. When we talk about community living and participation, we are consciously aware that we are talking about this around multiple life domains. We argue for, on the one hand, fewer in-house programs and more individual engagement in mainstream activities. Again, real jobs, regular schools, local congregations, interpersonal relationships. Along all of these arenas, in employment, in education, housing, family, friendships, romance, religion, civic activity. When you look at peer surveys and you ask what are people looking for, they pretty much come back with the same thing everyone comes back with. They'd like a good job, a decent place to live, and some strong friendships. You wouldn't think this would be so difficult for us to deliver, but it has proven really challenging for many of our mental health systems. And in response, we have unintentionally created a kind of new world for people in which our agencies and services provide all of that. This is what I refer to as, well, I think of community inclusion as helping people to move beyond what I call the overly warm embrace of the mental health system. And you'd think this would be easy, but it turns out to be more difficult than we had originally thought. The sociologist Susan Estroff talked years ago about how we had built a subculture of psychiatric disability, and the growing number of people who build all of their engagements in many of these domains around the eager interests of mental health programs and individuals and practitioners to build an alternative network of activities. We argue that while those services may have some short-term value, ultimately our job is to help people re-engage in community life. But we are aware of the difficulties of this change, and we are aware of the counter-arguments. Here are let's just spend a moment looking at the arguments you're likely to hear as you begin to talk about promoting community inclusion. A lot of agencies have said to us, we already do this, and yet when we look at what those agencies are actually doing, they're getting people together for a trip as a group in the van to a local concert or sports activity, rather than helping people figure out what kinds of activities in the community they want to do and to help them to do it individually with their personal friendships. And so I think the first thing you need to do is sometimes audit your own programs and see, do you really do this, and begin to ask your consumers about whether they think you do that. We also hear often our clients appreciate the current supports that we provide, and indeed I think that's true. Almost all of the agencies who bother to do surveys of the people they support receive overwhelmingly positive reports back and great appreciation. But I will tell you that occasionally agencies have said, well, we appreciate your support, but are there other things that we could be doing? If we ask the right question in the right way, we get a flood of responses from peers saying, well, we love your services, but frankly, I'd like to do more of this. I'd like to be helped to do that. I'd like to get a job. I'd like to get away from the agency for a little bit. You'll hear, third, that there's little evidence that such programs will work. I think if you look at our website and particularly the publication in the resources section, which I'll talk about a little bit more later, well together, you'll see that there is a vast amount of evidence that community inclusion programs do in fact work, and work along a number of domains. And the fourth is that objection you'll hear is that there are no funds to pursue the community inclusion agenda. And although we'll be talking about that a little bit later in a little bit more greater detail, indeed there are lots of opportunities both to redirect your current funds as well as to find new funding to make this possible. With all of that said, our agenda today is to review the 10 categories of activities local programs can implement now to jumpstart their commitment to community inclusion. We're going to identify some of our personal favorites, Gretchen and I, among the 66 suggestions here, and also try to point to some particularly helpful resources that are also outlined in the toolkit. We're going to discuss some recent examples in the field of individuals and agencies who have moved toward community inclusion, and we're going to invite your input both now and in the years to come. And hope that you will find this useful and take every opportunity to look at the document, to look at other documents outlined there and on our website, and to be in touch with us. So let's start. One of the first categories that we identified in the Jumpstart document is, in some sense, the obligation and the opportunity to educate people about community inclusion. Really not a bad way to begin. Partially because community living and participation is not a widely understood or shared goal, at least not yet. And you may want to start by educating key constituencies about community inclusion. So here are some of those constituencies. It's pretty broad, but by no means necessarily all inclusive. You may want to start talking to your board about why community inclusion is important and what the implications are for the way the agency may need to change. Certainly you should start talking to service recipients about these new goals that you want to discuss with them. And you may want to talk to executive leadership within the agency. You certainly should be providing some training to practitioners. It will be important to talk with family members. And then, of course, you will want to begin talking with the community organizations, the mainstream organizations, into which many of the individuals you serve may want to insert themselves, the kinds of groups in the community that people want to participate in. You'll also need to talk to funders and to professional groups. In doing all of these, you have a couple of obligations to explain the fundamental concepts and challenges of community inclusion. And here again, that well-together document you'll find in the book, it can be very useful. But in all of these educational programs, you need to be prepared both to talk and to listen. People are going to have fairly strong responses in almost any of these sessions. Both enthusiasm and some profound concerns. If it was up to me, I'd probably start my educational program with service recipients. But even here, I think you'll need to be expecting a pretty varied response. In some instances, you're going to hear a great deal of enthusiasm. I talked before about agencies asking clients what else they would like. There was a program in Riverside, California that got very positive reviews from clients, but then they asked, what else would you like? And people said, well, we love the trips and we love the activities and we love the picnics, but frankly, we'd rather go to work. And they began to reorient their program around work opportunities. You'll hear some hesitancy. We did a presentation in Scranton, Pennsylvania once about the shift to community inclusion, and an awful lot of clients in that group immediately raised objections about the kinds of opportunities they thought they would be missing, and focused particularly on the Wednesday night bingo party. And so making clear to groups that some things will continue and that we will be supporting people as they go into the community is going to be a large part of what you need to do to overcome that hesitancy. And you're going to hear some outright fears of the discrimination people feel they will face, some of the failures that they have experienced on their own. And it is going to be important to keep at this issue and see these kinds of educational programs as continuous and long-term. One example we've dealt with comes from Delaware County, Pennsylvania, where we were part of a self-directed care project that both the county and the Mental Health Association co-sponsored. In this project, consumers we talked to could spend the same amount of Medicaid money in the year ahead as they had spent in the previous year, but on anything that they felt promoted their recovery goals and that promoted community inclusion. We took emergency care and hospitalization dollars off the table, but they could make the decision to cut back on case management and spend the same amount of money on tuition at a local community college. They could cut back on their attendance at the day program and use those dollars to travel. We were sort of wide open and encouraging that people reconsider how they spent those dollars. But it turned out to be more of a long-term educational process than we had anticipated. There was tremendous hesitancy for about 6 months and then a flood of requests. People weren't quite sure how to reorganize the services they were receiving to meet their needs, but when they finally realized how open we were, they did begin to cut back on some of the traditional services and ask for money to do a whole range of things. Somebody asked for a lawn mower so we could earn money over the summer cutting lawns. Someone asked for money to support a bus trip so she could reconnect with relatives. Some other fellow asked for school tuition so he could begin to prepare for a job that he had always wanted by going to the local community college. Somebody asked for funds to go to an art class. The one that got to me was a woman who asked if she could have a little bit of money so she could throw a baby shower for her pregnant sister. This got to me because it spoke so clearly to one of the goals of community inclusion. She wanted to play a new and newly important and newly effective role within her family. And we saw this as a way to change the way the family saw her and the way she saw her relationship to the family on a more equal basis. Each of your stakeholder groups is likely to be hesitant and questioning and curious and excited. And your job in this particular domain of jumpstarting community inclusion is to educate people to the possibilities. The second category that we talk about is around building commitment. And maybe after or maybe even before you take on the educational task, you think about ways in which you can build the agency's commitment. We have a number of them here that we'd like to talk about. One of the things you can do as an agency is to commit to the concept of community inclusion. There are a variety of ways in which you can do that. I like the notion of establishing a community inclusion advisory committee, a broad-based multi-constituency group that can drive the process forward. Other agencies have looked at their mission statement and made sure that they have broadened it out to include or to emphasize community inclusion. You may want to look at the proposals your agency puts in for funding and make sure that it is clear there that community inclusion is a primary goal. Start a pilot program where you begin small but provide some people the opportunity and try to build momentum from there. Work with a single mainstream organization. It's important to build a welcoming work environment within your agency, making sure that you look at your policies internally so that staff members who have a history of psychiatric disability feel welcome there as well, and press local funders to begin to support community inclusion. I'm sort of touring between a community inclusion advisory group, which I think would be very effective, and a pilot program. But let me talk a little bit about a couple of pilot programs we've worked on. We work here with two agencies in Philadelphia, both Resources for Human Development and Pathways Housing, both of whom wanted to start a pilot to address what they saw as the isolation of the individuals they worked with who they had placed in independent housing, which is to say a lot of people came in from being homeless or in other sheltered settings and had a place of their own, but then found themselves somewhat isolated in terms of their ability to connect to the rest of the community. And some of these agencies have built the sorts of programs within house or group activities that we've talked about but haven't been very effective at linking people independently to the community activities of their individual choice. In both of these settings, we've trained case managers and peer specialists and given them the tools they need, which we'll talk about again in a moment, to explore what kinds of individual goals they have, and then to begin to develop planning around how can they attain those goals. Do they want to begin to attend ball games? Do they want to join the Y? Are they interested in joining a particular congregation and doing more than just attending services, but being involved in the life of the congregation? And we've been training case managers and peer specialists in what that takes. And here again, we've witnessed a slow but really quite steady shift from sort of inactivity of individuals and a range of staff-planned activities and group trips. And I have to confess that when I worked at Horizon House, a psychosocial agency here in Philadelphia in the 60s, I was the king of group trips. But shifting from those to working and helping people figure out what they as individuals wanted to do, where they could find the support to do that, and encourage them to explore connecting to the community as individuals. Again, it taught us to acknowledge the importance of the in-house programs that many folks offer, but trying to make those programs part of a supported pathway, as I mentioned before, toward participating in the community and moving beyond that subculture of psychiatric disability. As a resource, one of the things we noted in the toolkit is a document on our website called Specific Strategies to Help Make Community Inclusion a Reality. It is a really terrific grab bag of pilot ideas that would be easy enough for most programs to launch tomorrow. And I'm going to stop there and ask again whether there are any comments or questions or arguments or disagreements. But if not, I'm going to turn it over to Gretchen to talk about the assessment process.
Okay. So one of the things that is important, because there's, as Rick mentioned, there's a lot of areas that you could really focus on, and it can feel pretty overwhelming to think that you have to focus on all areas of community participation all at once. But one thing that is important is that you don't just focus on the things that you think are cool and exciting and forget about really making sure that this is consumer driven. And so the assessment process really looks at opportunities to ask service recipients about what their goals are for community living and participation. And it also gives you some understanding of, once you've identified what those interests are, how you can use different staff skills to support those areas of community inclusion. This also may look at specific assessments within your current policies, programs, and practices. So you're looking at, we say that this is important, but do we have the structure within our organization and within our programs to actually support community living and participation? And you can assess within, but you can also assess externally and looking at the views and attitudes of those mainstream community organizations. What we found a lot of times when we talk to community organizations is that they want to help and they want to be inclusive and they want to support people, but often what their idea is to come into the agency to provide some special opportunities. And really it's just an opportunity to assess what their thoughts are so that you can help make that shift in supporting people to go out into the community instead of bringing them in. And then finally, you can look at spotlighting some specific inclusion needs of maybe some specific subpopulations within your organization. So are there specific needs of the parents that you serve? Do women have specific needs? Are there needs for community inclusion for those who are LGBTQI? One of the areas that I'm going to specifically talk about is using the Temple University Community Participation Measure. And this This measure is something that we developed, and we use it in our research, but we've also worked with some agencies in looking at ways to integrate it within their organization. And there's a few different ways that it can be used. But as a brief overview, there are 26 items within this. It asks about things like work for pay, it asks about volunteering, it asks about religious participation, recreation, physical activity and exercise. So there's a lot of different domains that it asks about, and it asks people about the number of days that they've participated in that activity in the past 30 days without a staff member. And that without a staff member is important because really what we want is people out participating in the community just like everyone else. And typically, we don't, as general community members, you don't necessarily go out into the community with staff members sort of supervising you. So we recognize that the staff member piece may be important for training, but we want people to be able to go and participate on their own. Another question is that it asks about whether or not this activity is important to the individual. And then there's an assessment of sufficiency, which is simply, do they do it enough, do they do it not enough, or do they do it too much? And so what you'll see in this picture is just some of those results from a broad group of individuals that we've surveyed. 63% of people with psychiatric disabilities say that going to school to earn a degree is important, and 68% of them would like to do it more often. And I put this up here because one of the things that you can use this measure for is conducting a broad census of your participants to look at those bigger areas of community living and participation where there's a group of people that are really interested and they would like to do it more. If you find that 90% of your participants participate or use public transportation as much as they would like, it's probably not an area that you need to continue to focus on. But if you find that 80% would like to use public transportation and they would like to use it more, then that might be something as an organization you can say, okay, how can we shift our programming, how can we provide staff support to really target that area? And with ongoing evaluations, you can start to look at how your agency has shifted in supports and the areas of participation that people are achieving, and that can be a benchmark to improve that. The other thing is that the Temple University Community Participation Measure can be used as an individual assessment, and you can work through a treatment planning process one-on-one in better understanding what individual consumers are doing out in their community, what they are satisfied with in terms of their participation, and then areas that they would like to increase participation. So you can also use this tool as a means to start that conversation, jumpstart that conversation, if you will, about areas of participation that are important and take the steps in supporting them to increase participation in those areas.
One of the things that I think that you may want to look at as a key resource that we've identified in the toolkit and is on our website is what's called the Peer Facilitated Community Inclusion Toolkit, which we developed along with the Copeland Center as a way for peer specialists to do some of this work, and we'll be talking about that in a moment. But it provides a nice orientation to how to do the part of the assessment that Gretchen was talking about, and that is getting individuals to make decisions and to begin to plan on how they want to move forward. Okay, shall we move on?
Yeah.
All right. We mentioned earlier, I mentioned earlier that we were going to talk a little bit about funding because you will hear, yeah, but we have no funds to pursue this. And there are some important issues to be addressed here. Certainly, we think it's possible for agencies to begin to think about shifting the funds they currently spend on traditional in-house activities or group trips into the community on more individualized community inclusion activities. you may want to consider that. Mark is the nation's leading advocate for beginning to define community inclusion activities as a medical necessity. If you look at our Well Together document on the website, you'll find the justification for convincing primarily Medicaid that one of the medical necessities that mental health systems need to provide is helping people to engage in the community, and the therapeutic benefit and the lifestyle benefits of community inclusion in strengthening people's overall mental health and coping and recovery capabilities. And we certainly used that argument of medical necessity in developing self-directed care initiatives, which is one way to begin to develop a specific funding for programs. I think community inclusion would have a lot of appeal, does have a lot of appeal to the possibilities for philanthropic support. And you may want to start talking about the development officers with your development officers in your agencies about shifting some of the philanthropic support you've been able to gather or new possibilities for philanthropic support to provide funding for community inclusion activities. You can start a scholarship fund, and we'll talk in a moment about drawing on the resources of peer support for this. I'm going to talk about a kind of unique example from McHenry, Illinois, which is a community just north of Chicago, which made great use of philanthropic contributions to both hire staff with a community inclusion agenda as part of their job description, and to provide community inclusion scholarships. It came about because this agency, which had been around for quite a while, got a really quite lovely letter from an older woman thanking the agency for providing support for her son over the last 20 years, who'd been coming pretty regularly, almost every day, for years and years to participate in a range of activities within the agency. And in recognition of that, she wanted to make a major contribution to the agency, but almost in an aside, sort of wondered in the letter why he was still coming there every day after 20 years. The agency, to its credit, initially focused on answering the second question. Why was this guy still coming every day? Was it necessary? Why hadn't they done more to give him a life beyond the overly warm embrace of the mental health system? And as they began to explore that, they began to explore some of the concepts of community inclusion. When they got in touch with us, the philanthropist in question had offered a good deal of money to build a gym. They went back to her and said, you know, instead of a gym, we're going to develop for you a proposal that includes funding for 1 or 2 years for what we'll call community inclusion specialists. We'll do some staff-wide and community-wide education programs around community inclusion. And we're going to use some of that money to start a scholarship fund so that individuals can write a small proposal that say, I'd like some work tools or school tuition or art supplies or a gym membership that will allow me to participate in the community given my limited income. And then established a community-based scholarship review board that reviewed the proposals, which had been developed in consultation with staff, and funded just about everything. Over the years, they found this tremendously exciting, and although they were just focusing on the adult mental health portion of their program here, they were also a multidisability agency, and ultimately used what they had learned in this program through this very special funding to create community inclusion as the overall agenda for the agency. You can learn more about this, again, on our website. We have an evaluative report there, and we have a video in which Gretchen and I figure prominently, but a lot of interviews with a lot of individual clients, and sometimes touching, sometimes funny, sometimes just very inspiring examples from the service recipients who participated in the program. I want to move on now to training. Keeping my eye on the clock. It's important to distinguish between the education work we talked about earlier and training. Training really focuses on giving staff the skills they need, and there are a variety of skills they're going to need. I think you have to start in thinking about training, thinking about which of your staff are going to be focusing on community inclusion activities. Is it case managers? Is it peer specialists? Is it therapists? Is it everyone? But someone has to take the lead in working with people around defining their needs and learning how to use, for instance, a tool like the Temple University Community Participation Measure. Developing job descriptions for community inclusion specialists, if that's the way they go. To remember that supervisors are going to need support and training if they're going to adequately supervise the people, the staff who work for them. And mention as well the training that's needed. One aspect of the training that's needed is looking at the risks of community inclusion. I think we need to be fairly straightforward about there being some significant risks. Certainly, family members and consumers themselves have raised the question of how risky this is from their perspective. Communities have raised the questions about whether there are risks involved from their perspective. And I think in the center of that are agencies, which are concerned that they don't, frankly, screw it up in some way that risks the reputation of the agency. One of our colleagues, Bill Burns-Lynch, has developed a wonderful monograph that you can find on our website called Managing Risk. And it takes the perspective that, indeed, there are some risks involved with community inclusion across all three of these populations. But there is a great deal you can do to anticipate and ameliorate those risks. What is it you're afraid is going to happen, and what can you do beforehand to minimize the possibility of things going south? And if bad things do happen, how are you going to respond? And this makes everyone a lot more comfortable. It makes consumers a lot more comfortable that we're not sort of abandoning them to the community, but really committing to continue to support them in the community. I think it makes communities more comfortable that they can get back to the agency with concerns that they have. And it leaves the agency in a much stronger position. I suggest you take a look at that. It may apply in other settings as well. Part of the training, however, has to be to sort of understand that doing the work of community inclusion involves a lot more than completing the community participation measure and developing an initial plan. Staff are going to need some help in learning how to partner with service recipients to identify the community resources that are available to them. If you want to go to school, what educational opportunities are there? If you want to join a church, which congregations are available and might be interested? You're going to have to help develop the skills service recipients need without relying too much on in-house programming. And in a lot of instances, community inclusion specialists are going to be accompanying individuals into the community, or maybe recruiting other family members or other members of the community to provide immediate on-site support. There's going to be training around dealing with environmental barriers. Where do you find the funds for community inclusion or solve the transportation problems? We need to have discussions about disclosure so that individuals going into the community are clear about their decision, whether they want to disclose or not. Lots of people don't. Many people do. But for those who do, how and when and where do they do that disclosure? People need some training in working with mainstream groups to make sure where consumers have said they're comfortable with disclosure, finding ways to talk to mainstream groups in the community, to your local Y or to a local church or to a local recreation program about the fact that there's someone with this particular disability who wants to join in. And then in an ongoing way responding to the current concerns of communities. We've done a great deal of training. I think we're getting more aware of how much more follows the implementation of the community participation measure and what a long-term process this is going to be for people. Any questions, comments?
We heard beep, but we weren't sure what that meant.
All right. Let's move on quickly. I want to talk about programming. Gretchen was saying earlier that you may find that a great many of the consumers who complete any sort of assessment or the community participation measure identify a particular area that they're interested in. A lot of people want to go to work or join a congregation or talk about their romantic lives or whatever. There are programs that you can start within your agency that promote community inclusion, and we broadly recommend using what I guess we've come to call support technologies, many of them based on the approach of supported employment, which is to say that, yeah, we're open to everybody. We are interested in getting people quickly engaged in the community and supporting them there. So there are supported employment programs, there are supported education programs, there are supported housing programs that move people quickly into engagement in the community. And we can apply some of those in facilitating family relationships, developing social opportunities, getting engaged in recreation programs, and connecting to local congregations without the approach that many of us have taken in the past of training and training and training the service recipient until we feel they're fully ready to participate in the community, but rather get them started and get them started quickly. One example of that that I always go back to is a woman I worked with many years ago who was, I think, even before the invention of the peer specialist role, was sort of the first peer specialist I ever knew. She had a long history of emotional problems, but had gotten a job as a job coach. And she helped people quickly go back to work. She said the best part of her job was Sunday night, because if she had 14 clients who were working, at least 6 of them would call her Sunday night and say, I'm getting nervous about going back to work tomorrow. I'm getting sort of antsy about going back to work. Frankly, I think I'm decompensating because I really don't want to go back to work following this nice weekend that I've had. And her response was, oh, goodness, give me a break. What do you think everybody else is thinking about on Sunday night? Nobody wants to go back to work. And what she did was say to them, go back to work and then call me Monday night and tell me how it went. And one of the things that she was doing through this sort of programmatic approach of getting them out there and sort of encouraging them to participate was normalizing their experiences rather than pathologizing their experiences, and trying to make sure in this supported employment program that people knew the expectation was that they're going to be engaged in real work for real pay from the outset.
So we're hearing some beeping, and I think that means that somebody has raised their hand. Is there a question? If so, I'm hoping that you can see the chat function in the side, or you should be able to unmute yourself if you want to ask it out loud, which is always exciting for us. But if you send your question to the host and presenter, it will come directly to us. Otherwise, if it was just the thing that you didn't realize you hit, we'll move on. Okay. Again, please feel free to interrupt us. Oh, I see. From Michelle, we have, I'm a recovery guide. Can we be trained? Yes.
Sure. I mean, we're always happy to offer training. It's the best part of our job. But you might want to look at the materials that we've provided and see whether there's enough there to do training, or we could talk with you or a trainer there about what it might require and do some of the consultation in a kind of distance learning format. Part of what we've done in a number of different settings is provide some half-day or full-day initial training, introducing people to the concepts of community inclusion and the skills required, and then do a bi-weekly or monthly case study through a distance learning format, either using Skype or just the phone. Somebody says, well, I've been talking with one of my clients and he's interested in this, that, or the other thing. I don't know how to get started. And then we provide suggestions and support the group in seeing how folks can go forward. So there's both this initial training and the ongoing opportunity to talk about the challenges that you face. But yes, we'd be happy to work with you. Get in touch with us separately, and we can talk about a variety of different approaches to training.
And you may not have noticed, but Rick likes to talk, so
oh yeah.
We're happy to have those conversations, because sometimes you want training, but you're not exactly sure what it looks like, and we're happy to help you sort of figure that out and sort of tailor fit something to your needs to promote community living and participation.
All right, let's talk about Innovate. I was looking for one-word descriptions for each section, and this is really about making the best possible use of what we think is the best possible use of peer specialists to address the community inclusion needs of the people we serve. I couldn't come up with a more descriptive term. I wound up using Innovate. For a while, I was calling it Peericize, but that seems like a terrible title. So if you have a good suggestion for how we can rename this particular section, let us know. But the focus here is on making the best use, we think, of the unique capacities of peer specialists by asking peer specialists to really focus on the community inclusion agenda. You may already have peer specialists in your agency and begin talking with them about whether they can add this to their agenda or whether they would like to specialize in this particular arena of helping people connect to the community. And I think there are both, you can have peer specialists working as generalists or just working on this issue. In a couple settings around the country, peer specialists not only focus just on community inclusion, but on one domain of community inclusion. Excuse me, there are some training programs now, training peer specialists to be more helpful around people returning to competitive employment. And we can direct you to some of those. But again, this is going to require a kind of intensive and ongoing peer training for peer specialists, as it would for anyone. You may want to take the approach of looking at RAP, if your peer specialists use that, and making sure it has a stronger community inclusion focus than most RAP plans currently have. You may find new funding just to hire peer specialists, which is happening now in the state of Delaware. And really begin to train and supervise peer specialists as well as family members to focus on the issues of community inclusion. Example might be that we've worked with Matt Federici at the Copeland Center, which is kind of the leading trainer of peer specialists, particularly with regard to RAP, to develop training and offer training in a variety of settings that help peer specialists focus on community inclusion. Peer specialists bring this very special quality of having a lived experience, being able to and willing to share, being good examples of people who have begun to work and to engage with the community. They have a particular empathy and experience that breaks through some of the barriers people put up. We're currently working with Matt in training peer specialists in this area in Virginia. all in 6 different sites across the state. And we're going to be using as a resource, as I mentioned before, the document called the Peer Facilitated Toolkit that we developed collaboratively with Matt. But I'd also suggest that you take a look at a document on the website that's called Into the Thick of Things. This is really directed specifically for peer-operated programs. We did a survey about 4 or 5 years ago of peer-operated programs across the country in alliance with the National Coalition of, I've forgotten their name, of peer-run programs. And we asked peer-run programs across the country, about 200 of them, about what kinds of community inclusion programs they have provided. And we just got some wonderful answers. And the book is full of wonderful examples of things that peer-run programs have done on their own. And I'd suggest you take a look at both of those. Gretchen, I'm going to turn to you to talk about welcoming.
Welcoming. All right. So the next section is called Welcome. And what this really looks at, we always want to be a welcoming space, but this also looks at how do we engage the community and create a community environment that is welcoming and inclusive of individuals with mental illnesses. And so the first thing, I'll go through a few of these, and then we have a specific example that is one of my personal favorites. But the first is to really look at a community advisory group. And this is where you start to bring those members of the community into your organization, and you start to talk about those issues of community inclusion and participation. You provide an opportunity for folks to ask questions about how best to support individuals in the community. You come up with strategies to create more welcoming environments and initiatives that are occurring in mainstream environments, but you're hearing the voices from the community members as well, which is important because you don't want to be the only ones talking about this in an isolated environment within the mental health center. You want the engagement from the community because that's how you're going to get people, not only should you be, this is maybe a bad metaphor, but pushing people out into the community, you want the community pulling people into the community. And so another strategy that we've done here, and we have a manual for it, is hosting an activity fair, which provides a space for mainstream providers to come in and feature the resources that they have available. I'll go into a little bit more detail on this in just a moment. One thing you can also do is support mainstream community groups that have a particular interest in including individuals with mental illnesses. You can help them to assess their own programs and practices. One of my favorite examples was a yoga studio. The instructor was very excited to support individuals, and she said, hey, I will come. I'll offer special classes just for your group. It'll be great. They can get really one-on-one attention. And her heart was definitely in the right place, but a better approach was to instead say, no, let's support people one-on-one who were really interested in yoga to go into your studio and participate just like everyone else. And it was that framing and supporting them to think how their programming could better support individuals that we could really move it forward. Looking at mental health education programs that emphasize inclusion. One of the things that we know, there's a lot of mental health first aid, there's a lot of community programs where public health departments will focus on strategies that community members can do to support people with mental illnesses, but it doesn't really talk about the importance of community inclusion or the opportunities and the abilities of individuals to participate just like everyone else. So we should be working with those educators to make sure that there are components about community inclusion and that the majority of the time people are participating in the community, and that is a healthy resource for them as well, instead of only focusing on times of crisis. We should look to find individual connectors into the community, and these are going to be individuals who believe in that activity. So it could be specific individuals in a religious congregation. It might be a specific person at a humane shelter or animal shelter for volunteering. But it's a specific individual that, you know, you've had a conversation with. They're passionate about people participating in their mainstream activity, and they say, yeah, if you have people that are interested in this activity, have them contact me. I would love to talk with them and help them through that process. And then it is less on you as a mental health provider in chaperoning every experience, but really helping people to connect to those mainstream organizations, which is really how, you know, anyone really joins in and participates in the community. The next thing is maybe you could sponsor a community education workshop. And some of these can combine together. You know, if you're establishing an advisory group, a first step might be to create this community education workshop where you start the conversation and then really look to grab interested members from that group to form that more formal advisory committee. And then, you know, look to your board members who might serve as community inclusion ambassadors. We all wear very diverse hats. Your board members, I'm sure, are not only board members for a mental health agency, but they're engaged in softball leagues, they're engaged in, I don't know, walking groups. I'm not coming up with very exciting examples right now, but, you know, they have a lot of diverse hats that they wear. They might volunteer at a soup kitchen. Think about the different things that they're doing within their community, and they can start to spread the word and be ambassadors in that environment. And then the other thing is to, you know, don't forget about service recipients and engaging them in this process as well, and helping them to educate the community, because they're going to be, the people with lived experience are going to be the experts on this, and so they should be helping to educate the community about the importance of community living and participation. I'm taking a quick look at a question. The question says, hello again, have you considered including additional professions such as occupational therapists into the training and implementation of these programs? Sure. We actually, in the Department of Rehabilitation Sciences here at Temple, we have both academic programs of occupational therapy and recreational therapy. We've hosted an event here where we brought in mental health professionals working who are also mental health professionals who are administrators, but also might be employed as occupational therapists or recreational therapists to talk about the roles and strategies as well of what they can do to promote community living and participation. We've talked with social workers. You know, we're very excited to talk with a diverse set of professionals, and, you know, really we'll reach out to folks, but if people are like, this should be a good fit for whatever profession it is, we're happy to continue and engage in those conversations, because I do think that a lot of the more professionals that we get involved with this, the more likely we will be successful in promoting community living and participation. One specific thing that we've done is we've hosted a couple different activity fairs. One was specific to physical activity and exercise opportunities, and the other was more generally related to recreation opportunities in the community. And the way that this worked was it was an event fair, but the vendors, so to speak, were these organizations that offer mainstream activities in the community. So this might be the library and the resources that they have. We had a bowling alley that was here. Ride Indigo, which is Philadelphia's bike share program, came. Parks and Recreation was here. There were some pop-up fitness groups that were free or low cost that came. And so these vendors would set up tables. We had a leisure interest assessment that some of our student volunteers from the recreational therapy program, they conducted these leisure interest assessments with participants to help them connect more specifically to their interests that were there. So if I was interested in a book club, you know, and that came up in my interest assessment as that student, I would refer them, oh, make sure that you check out the library because that's going to be a good fit for you. The other thing that these provide the opportunity is to educate community members about the interests and needs of individuals with mental illnesses. So this is a good opportunity to have that interface between mainstream providers, mental health providers, and individuals receiving services as well. So you have a great mix of people who can kind of all be in the same room and talking about opportunities for community participation instead of talking about problems that might be going on. So it's a very positive event, and there's a lot of energy around how do we get people out and engaged in our organization. So they've been a lot of fun. We do have a manual if you're interested in hosting your own. It's a very long link, but if you go to our website, I'm sure you can find it. And Rick, you're up next, right?
Okay. Evaluation. It may be a little early to start thinking about it, but in fact, it's never too early to start thinking about it. I think you want to do your best to track your own progress. There are a variety of ways in which you can do this, but being able to say, to identify where you've made progress and the impact you have is tremendously important. It's important in terms of future funding. It's important in terms of staff and client morale. It's important in terms of your relationships with the community and their interest and cooperation with you. And it's important just in terms of making mid-course corrections in what you're doing. So while we encourage you to get started, as you get started, try to think ahead to where will you be in 6 months, and what do you want to be able to say, even if it's just in terms of the process or the community inclusion outcomes, about how well this program is working and the changes you need to make it work better. Certainly you can use that TUCPM or other recovery measures to try to track community participation of individuals or of if you have a lot of this going on, of individuals across the whole program. You can take a more qualitative approach, ask service recipients to assess the agency's effectiveness and responsiveness to these needs individually, or you can use focus groups and discussions, and you can have those discussions with the community as well as your staff, as well as the clients that you are looking at. Make sure you're developing an evaluation design that can be implemented regularly, and it will be important to present your findings in professional journals and conferences. I'm a big fan of qualitative research, probably because I don't do quantitative research very well myself. I leave that to my colleagues here. But beginning to develop even a list of individual stories that you can tell about the effectiveness of your program, not unlike Gretchen's yoga example. We worked with one program that had gone to had a number of women who wanted to learn more about knitting, and they went to a local yarn shop and asked the owner whether she would come in to the agency maybe once a week or every other week to teach knitting. And God love her, the woman said, "No, I can't possibly do that. I haven't the time for that sort of nonsense. But if you want to send those women to my Thursday night class, fine." That's what we're talking about when we talk about community inclusion. I worked with a program in Pittsburgh that told me they had wanted to design a voter registration program in which a group of clients from the Community Mental Health Center would be trained in voter registration, and then would help others in their agency register to vote and also go out to the state hospitals. They went to the local voter registration drive, and they said, "No, that's not a very good idea. Why don't you have the 4 people you've identified join one of them join each of our 4 voter registration teams and go out with them, and then we'll make sure each of those teams has a community mental health center or a psychiatric hospital where they will go do the registration." And it worked wonderfully well. Same stories about residential programs saying they'll do the Tuesday night town watch, and the town watch father saying, "No, let's just break you up and you can join, and one of you will be out every night with the rest of the community." Well, when you have a lot of those stories and you can document those stories. You can video those stories. You can share those stories in a variety of settings. This is one evaluation approach that I particularly like, and I'm hopeful you can begin to track both quantitatively and qualitatively the impact your program is having. Gretchen, I'm going to turn to you for number 10.
Celebrate! It's number 10. So along with evaluate, and this really kind of connects with, Rick's idea of storytelling. But don't hide or don't be secretive about your community inclusion efforts. Make sure you celebrate these things and really have opportunities to highlight those individuals. Are there publicity campaigns that you can promote? The nice thing about community living and participation is it often shows people enjoying themselves, and it often shows people out doing things in the community. And these make great opportunities for highlighting the cool things that your agency is doing. Make better use of social media. A lot of us have social media accounts, but we don't necessarily use them in a way that really highlights the different things that are going on. Stay tuned. We have a document coming out that's really going to provide some techniques for agencies to intentionally use their social media to either target community living and participation for consumers and be a resource, or to use social media as a way to sort of highlight the successes that are going on, providing opportunities for consumers to tell their own story and share those experiences on social media, opportunities to highlight specific programs that are going on. The next thing that I will go into a little bit more detail is using storytelling techniques and opportunities to give voice to the people who are doing things in the community, and sharing those in a fun environment through storytelling. And then also focus attention on community inclusion champions of staff. So staff members that are really, one, engaging in their own community in interesting ways, but also they've been hugely supportive of participants getting out and engaging in their community. Provide opportunity in staff meetings to talk about those successes, so that those staff meetings don't center around issues and problems, but actually, you have time to focus on those positive experiences. Highlight community members that are doing really cool and important things and pulling people into the community, and providing those opportunities for consumers to participate like everyone else. We all like to hear the things that we're doing well, so take the time to celebrate the consumers, celebrate staff, celebrate your own programs, and also celebrate the community members that are doing good work in this. One specific thing that we've done some work with is storytelling. We wanted to do this because it was fun, but there's also a lot of power in stories. So this past summer, we hosted our State of the Science Institute on Community Living and Participation. So we featured our research and other research that's going on in the field that talks about strategies to promote community living and participation. But that's a lot of listening to science, and it was heady stuff. So we had a little bit lighter lunch where we had some individuals who have lived experience telling their stories of community participation. Sorry, I got distracted by a comment, which I'll get to in just a moment. But we had probably 8 to 10 people tell their stories. They talked about meaningful roles that they've had with family members. They've talked about their own storytelling successes within different professional groups. And those storytelling opportunities provide opportunity for individuals to share their own abilities and focus on the things that they can and are doing. And when you tell those things in public spaces, they have the opportunity to change community attitudes. So you get to see people who are doing things, exciting things in the community. You get to connect around stories that may be very similar to your own stories. And so you have this opportunity to share those experiences. There's a number of ways that you can share these stories. It's great to collect them and have them talked about in a group. But another way that we would actually promote is to host a story slam, or host one in your own organization, or connect with a local coffee shop and host one out in the community. There are a number of story slams that are occurring, monthly, and if you're able to connect with some of those existing groups, have a theme that might connect with some of the individuals that you're working with, so they can go out and tell stories in those mainstream groups. My parents actually just worked with a local library to host a story slam in Topeka, Kansas, and they were terrified that it wouldn't go off, but they had 9 people telling stories and 50 people watching, and it was a success. And the next thing that happened was people were saying, oh, I want to do this more. So I think that there's opportunities from the community to have these things going on, and I think the mental health agencies having a presence at those can be very powerful and important. StoryCorps, which if you listen to NPR on Friday mornings, they feature 5-minute StoryCorps stories, and the cool thing about StoryCorps is anyone can do these interviews. It provides an opportunity for people to share their stories, and they get cataloged in the Library of Congress. So these stories become a part of the national conversation and really the fabric of who we are as Americans. So that's pretty cool too. And then there's other ways to share your stories. Your agency could have a podcast of community living and participation. You could have stories that you share in a community section of your newsletter, or you could have a community feature on social media, or a Fridays could be community feature day or something like that. So there's some opportunities as to how you could disseminate these stories, which provides opportunity to celebrate these successes. And once you start doing it more consistently, it becomes an expectation and really just becomes the norm. So I'm going to jump down to this question. And it says, how many supportive employment specialists have helped those with mental illnesses and intellectual developmental disabilities have gotten and kept a job? Rick says thousands. I don't have a number off the top of my head, but we do know that this is successful.
There are really 2 answers to the question, one of which is very hopeful and one of which is not so hopeful. The research evidence on the effectiveness of supported employment for both the mental health and the developmental disabilities fields is pretty convincing. That this programmatic effort to move people very quickly into real work for real pay and to support them there while they develop the additional skills they need is pretty convincing evidence. And I would estimate that there are thousands of job coaches in supported employment programs in both MH and MRDD agencies across the country who have a wide array of successful stories to tell. The less successful part of that is that there's also evidence that despite the success, the research evidence, and the enthusiasm around supported employment, particularly for the 2 populations you identified, that only about 5% of people with these disabilities, mental illness and developmental disabilities, have supported employment programs available to them. So on the one hand, we have this model that we know is more successful than anything else we've had. It's not perfect, but it's better than anything else we've got. And yet at the other end, an awful lot of people don't have that kind of program available to them. I hope that's a helpful answer, but it's another measure of how far we need to go to take employment seriously in our system and understand the connection between employment and community inclusion, and this broad notion of helping people to participate as they can best participate in those aspects of community life that are important to them.
The other question that popped up was, how many people have you moved out of nursing homes and institutions? Rick, do you have thoughts on that?
Well, two thoughts. One is we're not a direct service agency. We are a research and training center. So we have not moved people out of nursing homes and institutions. I'm not sure about the nursing home statistics, but I do know with regard to state psychiatric hospitals that something like 80%, there's been a decline of nearly 80% in the numbers of people living in state psychiatric hospitals. This is true all across the country. And even those who are still there, state agencies, which run state psychiatric hospitals, are seeking to move even some of the most difficult people into group living or independent living situations in the community. The issue that has plagued us since the beginning of the deinstitutionalization movement has been that it turns out to be a lot easier to move people into the community than to support people in becoming part of and participating in community life. That's what community living and participation really focuses on, that we do have a lot of people living in the community. Now we need to make sure that those people feel they have the opportunity, and particularly the support of the kinds of programs we've been talking about, to participate more actively in those aspects of community life they're interested in.
And we got some comments from other folks that say, I currently have 2 members that are employed through OBR, and then in the past 3 years I've had over 10 members that are holding employment to this day, and it requires many supports. So thank you for adding that in. We do know that this is happening, and we'd love to hear those stories. We have another comment that says, unfortunately, regular funding streams fail to fund competitive employment for individuals with mental illnesses and intellectual disabilities other than voc rehab programs. Funding isn't always accessible. We do recognize that there are funding issues, and part of our role is to get you guys excited about this. We talk to policymakers, but it takes a village to change policymakers' minds, and sometimes a lot larger groups than that. So, hopefully we can all recognize the importance of this. We can get consumers excited about it, and not only look at how we can shift services and their service delivery within the available funding streams, but also advocate to those policymakers that funding needs to be available for these opportunities.
And I'll just add a comment to the comment that people, the person who wrote to say they have people currently in employment and continuing to hold those jobs. One of my concerns around employment, but also around all aspects of community inclusion, is the importance of long-term support. We're not saying in this or any of these programs that you simply tell people to use the community and walk away from them. They are going to need an incredible amount of support to engage not only in competitive employment, but in religious activities or on a local baseball team or in a biking program or any of the activities. We're going to need to support getting them engaged, and then we're going to need to support them long term. I think one of the research challenges we face is trying to document what that long-term support consists of. I don't think we have a good research base. I don't think we have a good idea, and I don't think we've been doing enough of it in part to know what kind of support people need over the long term. How long is long term? How much of it is individual? How much of it is group? How often in the employment situation are you helping people develop new skills or intervening with the employer? Or what exactly is it? How often do people come back? We don't have a funding mechanism for these supports yet. So I think it's important to focus on both how many people have gotten jobs and continue to work, but also on what sorts of supports from us and from other sources make it possible for them to continue to work so that they have that everyday connection to community life.
I think similarly, we also need to better understand how the Americans with Disabilities Act applies to individuals with psychiatric disabilities. We do know that it does, but physical accessibility of spaces is an easier thing to address because it's pretty concrete. And so, you know, working with these mainstream organizations to understand what their responsibilities are to provide accommodations for people with disabilities, including mental health conditions, you know, and really trying to figure out what those best supports are and what that looks like, because, you know, ADA is there to protect all individuals with disabilities and promote their ability to participate just like everyone else. So I think we need to better understand what mainstream communities should be doing to support individuals as well.
And we're coming up on the end of our hour and a half with you. I want to offer a couple of cautions. We've gone through 66 different suggestions that we have, and we'll have some more the next time you call us. So don't think you have to do it all. I have to do one from everywhere. You don't have to do it too big. You don't have to have 80 people in your program. Start with 1 or 2 if that's where you are. You don't have to promise too much. This is going to take a while to get up and running and a while to see the results. But you do have to start. You can begin anywhere and build momentum from there. We've seen it happen. We've seen agencies shift and change, and suddenly the notion of community inclusion is at the center of what they do. We would like you to take a few moments to complete a survey about the webinar, as well as let us know what you plan to do. But we are available to help you and to work with you and to guide you to other resources. This is our website. This is this is my phone number and my email address, and I do really like to hear from people. Report back on what you thought, what works, what doesn't work, what new resources you've found, what new initiatives you've become. We hope this is the beginning, as I said, of a national conversation. And with that, I think
I'm going to make a quick comment on the survey and about this presentation. We have sent the survey link in the chat box, so you should be able to click on it or at least copy and paste it there. We will also be sending a follow-up email with the PowerPoint slides and a link to the survey in a few weeks. We will have the webinar available on our website. It takes us a little bit of time to get it up and going because we do like to transcribe everything so that you can download that transcript if you're using a screen reader. So that does take a little bit of time on our end, but stay tuned, it will be coming. On that survey, there is an opportunity for you to give us your email address if you would like us to follow up with you directly. That way we can reach out to you and ask about opportunities for training and technical assistance. There is also a space in the survey where we'd like to know what you're thinking about doing. You know, it's easy to sit and listen to a webinar. We really like that you've been here, but we want to know what your next steps are. What are you thinking about doing? Because once you sort of put that into writing, you know, you've started that process of making a commitment. So we'd love to hear what that is. And there was one more comment before we drop off, and we all go about our things. It says in Illinois, Voc Rehab has failed to help and support thousands of people. We do recognize that it's not a perfect system. You know, part of what we are hoping to do with these types of presentations and our services to provide training and technical assistance is that, you know, we can help make the change. You know, when we learn about these things and when other people see that there are opportunities and that people can and do participate, we want to help shift those attitudes. So when those things exist, and please help advocate and connect people to us, and we're happy to provide some training and technical assistance. We know the system isn't perfect right now. If it was, we probably wouldn't be a center. And so, yeah, hopefully this has been a good resource, and you know, we're able to think about those next steps. Rick, anything else?
Just thank you all for being here. I hope we've been helpful and given you 1 or 2 ideas for you to get started on this afternoon. Thank you all for joining us, and we'll be back in touch.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye.